into this room. All right, so hi everyone, my name is Mallory. I'm the coordinator of the Career Readiness Center in the Orfalea College of Business, and I'm really excited to introduce Courtney Jacobson, who's here to talk about applying for MBA programs and really kind of what she wished she had known when she was in your position. So Courtney graduated from Cal Poly in 2016, and she majored in business administration and concentrated in information systems with a minor in sustainable agriculture. While she was a student at Cal Poly, she co-founded the Women in Business Association, shout out, that's amazing, and launched the Women's Business Leadership Academy. She started her career with Deloitte Consulting in San Francisco as a technology consultant and has internship experience with Chevron, Ernst & Young, Salesforce, Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and the U.S. House of Representatives. So she will be attending Penn in the fall and is really excited to share all of her perspective that she's learned. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Courtney, to get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Mallory. And thank you guys all for joining. So I think I'm just going through the chat. I think I know a lot of you. So great to see familiar faces. And to those of you I haven't met before, thanks for joining this call virtually. And I hope sometime we get the opportunity to meet in person. I try and come down to Cal Poly and catch up with folks and meet up with other Cal Poly alum in the Bay Area. So thanks, Mallory, for the great introduction. I think I've talked to a lot of you, and I think a lot of you know my background and some of the things I've been focused on, but I really wanted to do this workshop because I think I just realized after having gone through this experience of applying to MBA programs and getting into school that I didn't really talk to a lot of folks about it in undergrad, and there's things I wish that I had known more about when I was in undergrad, and there's things that I did that I'm really glad that I did. And so I just wanted to really spend time helping you guys think through, especially the things that you can and should think about now, because there's so much time later on to focus on, you know, all the nitty-gritty details of applications and things like that. But I think there's some things you guys can do now, and I wanted to make sure to share that with you. And then I'll address the questions you guys have shared in the chat. I'm not going to look at the chat right now, but Mallory is going to be watching the chat, and when we have Q&A at the end, I'll make sure to leave a lot of time for Q&A. And then Travis, I think you are going to jump in at the end as well to talk about career services and how career services can help students and resources that you guys have available as well. So what I want to start by doing is just give a really brief kind of introduction as to like why you get an MBA, what you learn in an MBA, how kind of the high level details of how you apply for an MBA. There is so much knowledge available online. And so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I wanted to at least give you guys that framework. And then I wanted to share, I have 5 specific things I wanted to talk about that I think you guys can do or think about in undergrad. 4 of them I did, 1 of them I wish I had done. So I want to share that with you guys. And then I also want to just give a shout out to the seniors on the call and to anybody who has been impacted, had their internships or jobs impacted. It's just a tough time right now. And you guys, especially seniors, have worked so hard. You've earned this amazing spring quarter to graduate and launch your careers. And I'm so sorry that this is happening right now. I feel like I can really empathize with that because, you know, this is basically my kind of like spring quarter of senior year before I was supposed to take some time off this summer and travel before going back to school. So I definitely understand how it feels, and it's super disappointing. But something that I found has really helped me in this time is just kind of refocusing on how I can leverage this time and do things that I wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to do. And I think thinking about MBAs is one of those things. But I also just wanted to offer my time to anybody who needs help kind of navigating an unknown situation. I think you can find me on LinkedIn and would love to help you guys think about what to do if your job or internship might have gotten canceled, or you're just trying to figure out what to do with extra time in spring quarter. But I think there's a lot of people in the Cal Poly alumni network that are also available. So definitely like reach out to each other and support each other at this time. So heading back to MBA applications. So why do you get an MBA? I think there's a lot of different thoughts out there, but I really think about it in terms of three main reasons. I think the first is probably the most obvious. If you didn't start your career in business, or didn't study business in undergrad, if you're an engineer, if you were in liberal arts, and you need more of that foundational business knowledge, an MBA is a good opportunity to go back to school and learn basic accounting and finance and marketing. Another reason is if you want to make a career transition. So you can always be doing recruiting and changing jobs when you're working, but being in school and specifically being in an MBA program and all of the recruiting activities that support MBA programs make it an especially good way to pivot careers. So you'll see a lot of people who either start in traditional pre-MBA careers that are very general, like banking or consulting, and then they use the MBA to pivot into something more specific, like technology or healthcare. Or you'll see people who are doing something very specific, like architecture or manufacturing and supply chain, and they want to pivot into consulting or finance or technology. You'll see people use an MBA to do that. And I think the benefits that you have trying to do recruiting while you're in school is that you have a network of people, your peers in school, who have all come from those companies and those industries, so you can leverage them and their networks. But then also you have career services office, you have companies coming to recruit on campus. You have most large companies have very structured MBA internship programs. So again, similar to undergrad, it's another way to kind of get your foot into a company that has a very structured way of bringing you in. And then the third reason is that, and this is the one that I think is always hardest to judge, is you actually don't want to pivot careers and you don't need to go back to school because you studied business, the content that you need for your job, but you're trying to either accelerate your current career or prepare for a leadership role in the future that may necessitate an MBA. And so those are kind of the three main reasons why you go to MBA. And I think, like I said, the third one is kind of the hardest to judge. I think I saw some questions about how do you know when's the right time to go. I think it's a very personal decision. And I think some of the things I'm going to talk to you guys about that you can do now are things you should continue to do in your career, which is, talk to people who've gone and gotten an MBA, understand why they did it and what they're hoping to get out of it, so that you can kind of take their lessons learned and apply it to your own situation. Because again, choosing to go back to an MBA when it's not really required is really difficult to determine. And so the best way to do that is just talking to a lot of different people. So what do you learn in MBA? Like I said, for people who haven't studied business, which most of you I think are probably business majors, this doesn't apply, but there's people who don't come from the same background and want to learn, need to learn accounting and finance and things like that. But then MBA programs are really focused on leadership development. And so you'll see in the curriculum, in addition to, very in-depth courses in various subjects, you'll also see a lot of different leadership development, organizational behavior type courses and opportunities, because also MBA is very focused on curating opportunities that happen outside of the classroom. So leadership in clubs, leadership in conferences, different type of, they have very structured leadership programs. Like the leadership program at Penn is called the McNulty Leadership Program, and they do things like send people to the FBI's training facility to teach people how to cooperate as teams while going through whatever Quantico stuff looks like. So that's a big focus of the curriculum as well. Because again, a lot of people aren't coming to learn general knowledge. They're coming to really go in depth in particular areas, and they're coming to strengthen their leadership skills, because ultimately I think at a certain point, content and skill, technical skill set in your career becomes less important, and leadership and the ability to manage people and get people to all move towards a common goal becomes far more important. And that's really what an MBA is focused on teaching people. So that's kind of my very, very distilled down overview of why do you get an MBA and what do you learn in an MBA. And I also I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Mallory and I have been working on building like a resource sheet for you guys that's going to get sent out sometime later this week. So a lot of the things that I'm talking about, I've curated articles or websites or different resources that you can leverage to go more in depth. So that's why I'm kind of talking about a lot of these things at a very high level, because we have resources that we're going to share with you all. And Travis is also going to be helping provide some of those resources so that you can go more in depth on anything that you're interested in learning more about. Because like I said, there are far too many blogs out there talking about MBAs, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. So that's why do you get an MBA? How do you learn? Really high level application process. Most MBA programs do not allow or do not encourage people to go into an MBA straight out of undergrad. So generally you need, I would say the average is probably 3 to 5 years of work experience, depending on your career path. There are certain careers where MBA admissions committees feel that you've gotten more exposure, and so they'll generally accept candidates who are a little bit younger. So you'll see people coming out of consulting and banking, like investment banking or private equity, like a little bit younger, because they might have had kind of broader exposure more quickly. And so I think the average, if you look at the numbers, is probably somewhere around 5 or 6 years. I've been working for 3.5 years. It'll be 4 by the time I actually go to school. So I think that's a little bit on the younger side, but more traditional for people who are pre-MBA in consulting. So after a couple of years, you'll start the application process. You need to take either the GMAT or the GRE. Pretty much every MBA program now accepts the GRE, and we can talk about some of the considerations about which test to take. So you need to take the GRE, then you'll do the application process. The application includes some like questions similar to what you probably did for undergrad, which is like short little paragraphs about leadership roles that you've had, what your job, just like what you did in your job or your jobs that you had before MBA. Not too much about your family, because it's more focused on who you are as a professional. And then it includes some amount of essays. I think most schools have definitely one big essay, and then either 1 or 2 also big essays or smaller essays, and then your resume, and then letters of recommendation. So I think the letters of recommendation are probably the thing that's the biggest difference from undergrad. I don't think Cal Poly required letters of rec, but Travis is shaking his head no. So letters of rec is probably new for most people. Letters of recommendation are super, super important for business school. And I'm going to talk about mentors and, cultivating people who might ultimately serve as your recommender. But it's something to think about earlier rather than later, because typically, unless you're not able to tell your employer that you're applying for an MBA program, they want your direct supervisor at the time of application to write one letter of recommendation, and then either someone else who has managed you directly in your job or a previous job, or if you can show that you've had significant involvement and that person has overseen you in a different capacity, you can do that. So one of my recommenders was somebody that I worked with on a nonprofit, but I worked with her for a year, so that was relatively equivalent to how much time you would spend with a direct supervisor. But that person's job, or those 2 recommendations, are weighted very heavily in your application, and it's because they want to make sure that the way that you participate in a team and the way that you are showing up to work and all of that is going to be conducive to an MBA environment, because MBA is so much about the cohort and making sure like everybody is working together and helping each other grow. And so they want to see from your letters of recommendation that that's the type of person you are at work. So test scores, application, letters of recommendation. You submit your application. There's 2 rounds of, and sometimes 3 rounds of MBA deadlines. So as you start thinking about schools that you're interested in, start to do some research. I think there's probably a lot of different thought about applying round 1, which is in usually the September-October timeframe, we're applying round 2, which is like the January, February timeframe. But I think most admissions directors will tell you apply when your application is the strongest, because round 1 and round 2, I don't think it's better or worse to apply as long as you are ready and your application is strong. And then once you submit your application, pretty much every school has an interview portion, and your interview will either be with an alumni or with someone from the admissions department. And most of those are offered remotely, so you don't have to fly to campus. Like I did all of my interviews in San Francisco. And then after you interview, another couple of months will go by, and then you'll find out your decision. So that's very high level what the application process is. And then, like I said, in that resource that I developed with Mallory, I think I pointed to some other resources where you can research in more depth what applications look like. But pretty much year over year, the applications remain pretty consistent. So you can also just go onto a school's website and create a fake account. I would suggest using like a dummy email or some email that you're not going to use to apply for real in a couple of years. And you can download the application and see what it looks like. So that's the application process. And I will say it is a very hard process. It is not like fill out some fields, check the boxes, throw in the application and be done. So I made some very specific decisions, like when I started my application process, about what types of roles I was taking on at work, because in consulting, I take on projects. And so I worked with my leadership to kind of take a break from some of the more arduous projects so that I had time to study and do all of my essays and interviews and prepping for interviews and all that kind of stuff. So just take that into consideration. It is not, a one weekend project to do for sure. Okay, so I think that's kind of like the main overview that I wanted to cover with regards to applications and my perspective on why you might want to go to an MBA. Happy to talk more, and if there's time, I can also share a little bit more about my background and why I chose to do an MBA. But like I said, I think it's a very, very personal decision, and so I think it's just important that you talk to a lot of people and understand why they want to get an MBA, because that'll help you figure out if it's the right thing for you to do. But I want to kind of take a step back and think about being a senior at Cal Poly, some of the things that I was thinking about, probably even as a junior as well. I did 5 years, so I had a lot of extra time towards the end of Cal Poly to think about some of this stuff. And so I knew pretty early on in undergrad that I was ultimately going to go and try and go back and get my MBA. And so I made some decisions early on that kind of aligned with that goal. One of which was going to Deloitte Consulting, because consulting firms, for the most part, like the bigger consulting firms, have sponsorship programs to financially support you in going back to business school. So I talked to Deloitte Consulting a lot about that when I was interviewing, to learn about what we call our GSAT program and understand, how you become eligible for that and what that looks like. So that factored into my career decision making. But then I also did a couple of other activities that I kind of mentioned. So I think there's 5, I've kind of distilled it down. I think there's 5 main things that I would recommend you guys think about doing now or in the early years after you graduate, if you think this is something that you'd be interested in doing. So the 5 things are, like I mentioned, networking and learning about MBA programs. There's a lot of fantastic people in the Cal Poly alumni network, probably in your professional networks. I've been very fortunate that at Deloitte, a lot of people have MBAs. And so when I started working at Deloitte, I started having coffee chats with people who went to schools that I was interested in to learn more about their experiences. And so I think you can definitely start doing that now. I'm a resource. There's other Cal Poly alum that I'm aware of that have MBAs or in MBA programs. And then Travis, I'm sure, also, and Mallory can help track down some additional alums. So leverage that network for sure. I really encourage everyone, no matter if you want to do an MBA or not, to make an early career plan. I can talk to you guys a little bit about what that looks like. For those of you who are in the vision booking session, you might have heard about Jessica Ross's personal strategic plan. And And so I think one thing that I realized pretty quickly after graduating from Cal Poly is that when you're in school, you have a very clear plan. I mean, there's a sheet of all the different courses that you have to take to be able to graduate. And then you build in other things like, I want to do clubs, and this is when club leadership positions happen, and I want to do internships, and I want to do fraternity and sorority, whatever. You can build all of that stuff into your 4-year plan. There really isn't a blueprint for what you're going to do for your first 3 to 4 years after you graduate. And so I really encourage you to sit down and try and create that blueprint for yourself, because very quickly you're going to feel constrained between investing in your career, investing in your personal life, investing in yourself, and being very intentional about how you dedicate your time to those things is really important. So I think starting up with a plan, and if an MBA is in that plan, backing into an MBA and thinking about what types of experiences and exposure you want to have before you start applying is really important. The third thing is cultivating mentors and keeping in touch with your professors, because you have access to a lot of mentors and a lot of relationships right now. And I think a lot of people graduate and get really busy with work and kind of drop some of those relationships. But I really encourage you to be intentional about keeping those relationships strong, especially with your professors. The Cal Poly professors and administrators have introduced me to some of the most important people and have continued to serve as amazing mentors to me. And so I always try and keep in touch, send emails, just giving quick updates like, hey, when I got into business school, I shared with some of my Cal Poly professors that I was doing this. When I come down to SLO, or if they're in the Bay Area, try and get coffee with people. But those relationships are really important. So don't let them fall by the wayside when you kind of get busy with starting your job. The fourth thing is a little more tactical, but I think building a budget is really important, and understanding financially what it takes to achieve whatever your goal is. So for business school in particular, tuition is extremely expensive. And so that's, like I said, a big reason that I was excited about joining Deloitte, is because I knew there was an ability to get some financial sponsorship. But if your employer doesn't offer something like that, or if you're graduating, you have a lot of student debt and you need to figure out how to pay that off, building a budget, I think, is really important. And then making some decisions that will help you save money. I was fortunate enough to be able to live at home for the first, I think, 10 months after I graduated. And I'll be honest, like, it's not fun after you've been living in San Luis Obispo and having your own space. Moving with your parents is probably not the best thing. And my commute was terrible, but I saved a lot of money, and that gave me a lot of flexibility to be able to go back to school. I also, chose a part, like San Francisco is extremely expensive. I know a lot of you guys are going to move to the city. And, everybody wants the big apartment in the best neighborhoods with all their friends. And that's a really fun thing to do. And if you're working and you can afford it, you should do it. But if you want to go back to grad school, I would encourage you to also think about maybe choosing a less expensive apartment and just crashing with your friends in the cool neighborhoods on the weekends so that you can save some money on rent. Because having financial flexibility ends up being really, really important if you want to make decisions like going back to business school. And then the last thing that I know a lot of you guys want to talk about is taking the GMAT or the GRE. And that is the thing that I didn't do my spring quarter, and I'm totally kicking myself for it. I definitely chose to go wine tasting my spring quarter and not study for the GMAT because I didn't really take it seriously. And that ended up being a big pain because studying is really hard. The GMAT is a really, really hard test, and so is the GRE. And doing that on top of a really busy job, just to be perfectly honest, completely sucked. So if you have flexibility, like I said, unfortunately, there's probably some really exciting things that you guys are missing out on right now because you're at home and remote, but that might be, you might have some extra opportunity and space in your calendar. And if that's the case, I would encourage you to think about taking the GMAT or the GRE if you think you want to go back to any grad school. And so a quick couple of points on that, since I know folks are interested in that. The GMAT is pretty much only for business school. I think there may be a handful of other degrees, like if you're applying for a dual MBA and engineering degree, like some of those might accept the GMAT, like I'm doing a JD MBA. and I didn't have to take the LSAT. I was able to use my GMAT score. But for the most part, GMAT is only for business school, and then GRE is for most graduate degrees. Some law schools are starting to take the GRE, so I think that's going to be an increasing trend by the time you guys are applying. And so I would encourage you guys, if you don't know what kind of degree you want to pursue, but you want to take a test now, the GRE might be a good option. Like if you think you might want to do a master's in data science, or if you might go back and do computer science or some kind of engineering degree, or you want to go study political science, the GRE will end up being really useful. And I think both test scores are valid for, it's either 5 or 6 years. I think it's 5. And so that probably aligns with your timeline, because if you take it now, then you'll have 5 years. And you have to check the specifics of it, but I think it's valid 5 years from the date that you take the test. And I think as long as your test score is valid on the date that the application is due, then it's fine. And so you can take the test, let's say in August of 2019, or we're in 2020, oh gosh. You can take the test in August of 2020, and it will be valid until August of 2025. So if you have the time, I think it's a great thing to do. But I do want to also highlight, it is a very difficult test. It's a very expensive test. Well, the test itself is expensive. I think taking the GMAT each time, it's $250. And then on top of that, you probably need to invest in some study resources. So I personally use a tutor and use some of the online study curriculum. I've talked to a few different people. There's a lot of different things out there. And so I've included some resources in that sheet to talk about what types of resources are out there. But I would really encourage you guys to think about what's the right approach to studying that's going to work for you. I personally need to be held accountable, otherwise I won't do it. And so I paid for a tutor because I knew that if I was paying for it, I was going to take it more seriously. If you are able to motivate yourself to do the work, you can probably study more independently. But also, I think it's important to go into studying with a goal of what score you're looking for, and then realistically assess if the study method that you're going to choose is going to actually get you the score that you want. And so I think doing your research about the schools and the target GMAT ranges or GRE ranges is a good exercise. So making like a spreadsheet and saying, okay, I might be interested in these, 6 to 10 schools. I don't encourage you to apply to 10 schools, but you don't need to have like your 5 school list. And then map out what their GMAT scores are that they're looking for, or GRE. And then think about, you can take a free practice test of both through Manhattan Prep or through others. And so you can take an assessment and say, okay, I'm here, but I need to be here. Is studying independently by myself going to get me here? Should I take a class where it's like a professor, or not a professor, but like a tutor is teaching a group of students and I can just listen to the webinar and ask questions? Do I need a more personalized tutor to help me step by step? I'm sure you guys know all the different ways of studying after having to do the SAT or the ACT. But I will just say, I personally thought that these tests were quite a bit more difficult than studying for the ACT or the SAT. And so I know people who were totally fine studying by themselves for the SAT, but ended up using a class or a tutor to help them with the GMAT and the GRE because the tests are pretty hard. Yeah, so I will stop there. I think those are kind of the 5 big things that I think I'm really glad that I did, or I wish I did. When I was an undergrad, I think you guys have a unique opportunity right now if you have some extra time in your schedules to invest in some of these activities. But again, I think I've said this a couple of times, studying for the test, going through the application process, it's very time consuming, it is very expensive, and it is not something I would recommend you undertake kind of casually. And so I think the most important thing is just doing your research. There are a lot of resources online. There's a lot of people who will talk to you about an MBA. I would do that over studying or trying to draft essays or anything like that, because if you don't give it 100%, you probably aren't going to get into the school that you want to get into. And so you're much better off like really leveraging the great opportunity that you have, which is you're thinking about it early and not 3 months before the applications are due, to really lay the groundwork to make yourself as successful as possible. And I think that's the main thing that I did in like graduating Cal Poly in my first few years, that I'm really, really glad that I did. And so that's what I hope you guys take away from this. And so I'll open it up to questions. Mallory, do you want to help with some of the questions?
Yeah. And there's a couple in the chat that we can get started with. So where did you even begin in searching for schools or finding programs that you were interested in? And how did you figure out if those aligned with your own goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I also just want to really quickly, Travis, how much time do you want? 15 minutes, 10 minutes?
Just a couple is all I need.
Okay, cool. So maybe we have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So yeah, the research process is very overwhelming. I gave you guys a list of some resources that I found very useful. There's a blog called Poets and Quants. It's probably the leading blog about everything MBA admissions. And so I used that quite a bit. And like I said, I was very fortunate to have a lot of friends and mentors at Deloitte who had gone and gotten MBAs. And so what I did is I just had coffee with pretty much everybody that I worked with or met that did various MBA programs, and then took notes about what they said they did in those programs, what they liked about their school. And then I also started to think about my own criteria for what I wanted in an MBA program. And something that I wanted to do was move out of California. So I immediately kind of took California off the list because I've not left California. And so I thought living on the East Coast would be a great opportunity. And then I started focusing in on pretty much the Chicago region, the Boston region, and then Penn and Philadelphia, because there's a lot of schools there. But so I took kind of like a geographic approach to it, and then I leveraged my network. And then I also went off of rankings of the schools. So Deloitte is very specific. They only sponsor top 20 MBA programs. So that was that limited my list right there to 20 schools. And then started honing in on which ones of those I was interested in, mostly based off of my friends' experiences. I will say that then later, once I decided I wanted to do a JD MBA program, that was the second filter that really narrowed my schools down, because I'm doing a 3-year accelerated JD MBA program. And there's a lot more schools that are starting to offer them. But when I was applying, there were pretty much only 2 or 3 schools that I was interested in based on my other filters that offered these programs. So that was one thing. But then there's a lot of other very interesting dual degrees out there that I think the JD, like MBA programs in general, are very interesting. They're actually facing a decline in applications right now because a lot of people are asking questions about, do I need to do it? Does it financially make sense? Things like that. So they're starting to offer very specialized, unique programs. So you'll see programs like at Penn, there is the healthcare management program. So for folks who want to become leaders in the healthcare industry, whether that's a hospital system, an insurer, things like that, it really focuses on preparing you for the business side of healthcare. There's also a program, I'm speaking mostly about Penn and some of the schools I applied to, but there's a lot more out there. Northwestern has a program that a lot of my colleagues at Deloitte do, which is a master's in, I think it's like design, and it's like basically product design, and like customer centric design, and then an MBA. And so a lot of people who are in our digital customer experience group, who are really focused on helping clients create really digital customer centric experiences, do that combined masters. There's schools that focus on the retail industry. So there's a lot of things like that you can look for in either specialized programs, or another really important thing to do is look at the alumni of the school and where they're going. So the schools all report what industries their alumni are going to. I'll be honest, like the first three you're going to see out of any MBA program is probably going to be banking, consulting, and technology. And technology is super broad because like Airbnb and Salesforce are both considered technology, but those are wildly different industries. So that part's like a little harder to figure out, but you can assume, right, that a school in New York is probably sending a lot of people into the banking industry or the retail industry, whereas in the Midwest, it's going to be more consumer products, consulting, things like that. And then like Penn and Wharton is really known for finance and banking, but they're also really trying to build a brand around sending students into entrepreneurship and tech. So hopefully that, I know that was more, probably less focused advice, but I think there's a lot of things to consider. And I think being really clear on what your criteria are, and then interviewing people and researching schools and kind of aligning schools to those criteria will help you focus in on a select number of schools.
Nice. Thanks, Courtney. So we have another question about the application process and creating a successful and unique application. So how did you differentiate yourself from others that were applying for the programs you applied for?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think that actually leads me to something that I wanted to talk about, which is I think something I didn't maybe appreciate enough when I was in undergrad was that there are kind of traditional career paths to get to certain things. And it's really important that you understand that, not because you have to do the traditional path in order to get to the place you're trying to get to, but you should know that that path exists, and then you should decide if you're going to follow that path or if you're going to do something different. And so pre-MBA, there are very common career paths that people focus. Like I said, a lot of people come from banking and consulting. The reason that is because banking and consulting used to require that you get an MBA in order to be promoted in the firm. So you would work for 2 or 3 years, you would get an MBA, and then you could get promoted. And if you didn't go back to school, you couldn't continue to get promoted in the firm. That's no longer the case at any of these places, but it has built a culture that people go to banking and consulting, get very general experience, and then go get an MBA and then pick something more focused. So why did I just lose my train of thought? Mallory, can you say the question one more time? Oh, I'm sorry, differentiating your application. Okay. I say this because I recognized coming in that I was coming from a very traditional career path. And so there's two schools of thought. There's, you want to be in the majority because otherwise you're applying with a profile that's like wildly different from other applicants. And then maybe the admissions committee doesn't know how to evaluate you as well, whereas they know very well what a background in banking and consulting looks like. But there's also the school of thought, which is, hey, if you're applying from a less represented background, like professionally, the schools have increasingly been trying to curate more diverse classes that come from all these different industries. And so in some ways it can be an advantage as well to be coming from an area where there aren't hundreds or thousands of applicants applying from biotech or something like that. The reason I say you have to be aware that these paths exist is, like, I knew in consulting that pretty much the other thing too is they evaluate people by industry. So all the consultants are evaluated together, all the bankers are evaluated together, and then they pick a certain number of people from those categories to interview because they don't want a class that's entirely from specific industries. So I knew that I was going to be evaluated against people in consulting, and I was very thoughtful about differentiating myself from people in consulting, but also something that's always been really important to me is telling a very authentic story and representing myself in a very authentic way. I am absolutely not the person that will go in and, to an interview or anything and tell a different story. That might work against me in some cases, but that's just something really important to me. And so I think you heard from my background, like, I've always been interested in a lot of different things. I did agriculture, I did political science, I did consulting and focused on technology. So when I was writing my applications first, I was fortunate that I didn't really have to differentiate myself because I had already done that by continuing to pursue my passions. And I continued to do that after school. And so I think one thing that I would recommend too that you do when you first start working is it can be very easy to just give your job 130% of your time. But I think it's really important to invest in things outside of work. And so, like I said, I worked on a nonprofit for a year. I've always done a lot of volunteer work. I've also just pursued other interests. And then I was able to curate a very authentic story that was pretty different from people in consulting because I had pursued things that were outside of consulting. So again, I don't know if that's like the most helpful answer, but just some things to think about as you're choosing what activities you spend your time doing after school.
That's great advice. All right, so I think we have time for one more question. I know we have a number in here in the chat. Does anyone have a burning question that they want to make sure they get answered? Carly asked a good question about where to invest money. So for students that might be on a limited budget, especially right now, investing like in, a counselor person to help you with your app or consultants, test prep, resources. What has been most valuable for you, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question because again, it's really personal to what you need. But the way I approached it was investing in test prep and I did use a counselor to help me. Investing in those things, I kind of think of them as like an insurance policy for applying, right? This is kind of a one and done thing, and I wanted to put my best foot forward. So I guess if you were to make an investment in one area, I would say probably having a counselor help you write your essays, because if you think about it this way, you only apply to an MBA program once. A counselor, who's going to be a person like Travis who sees lots of different clients and helps people think about career paths and applications. Those people have basically applied to MBAs hundreds of times. And so don't you want the expert advice helping you through the process? I think test prep, there's more content available online that you can probably access if you're really creative. And then the other thing I would also encourage you to look out for is there's a lot of financial support to help people coming from underrepresented backgrounds get into MBA programs. So like none of the schools have hit 50% women, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. So there's a lot of programs to help women apply for MBA programs. There's programs to help people coming from different career paths. So if you're coming from the nonprofit sector and they know that you haven't been making a lot of money to pay for all of this expensive test prep and counselors and things like that, there's scholarships available there. And then, also first generation professional students as well. So there's resources to help people who have never applied to professional school. So I think doing research and looking out for those things can also help you alleviate some of the financial pain associated with these applications.
Nice. Thank you so much. So much incredible insight and wisdom. And I know Courtney has mentioned this, but the resource sheet that she has compiled is so full of just helpful tips and tricks that outline what she covered and so much more. So I think that'll be a really amazing way to follow up and just get started and distill all this information.
Yeah, and I also just want to say, I'm just looking in the chat and I see some kind of specific questions that folks might be interested in. Feel free to just message me on LinkedIn and I can answer some of those questions because I want to make sure that you guys are pointing in the right direction. But again, like Mallory said, a lot of that is going to be in the resource that she's going to send out. So look out for that. And then if that still doesn't answer your questions, feel free to send me a message and I will respond to you guys.
Thank you so much, Courtney. So before we kind of wrap off and say farewell, I want to pass it over to Travis Raynaud, who is the career counselor for the Orfalea College of Business, just to share a little bit about how career services can help you through this process.
Thanks. So I want to start by saying how appreciative I am for obviously Courtney and her expertise. I don't know about you all, but like my mind is blown in the best possible way. I'm also so excited because when I was logging in, I saw all these names of students that I haven't seen and I miss so much. So I'm feeling like positive energy on both sides from all Courtney's advice, and then seeing all these great students that are here. But I want to just real quick pop in and say, number one, I hope you all feel this, but just to reiterate, like the advice and guidance that Courtney just shared with you is literally worth thousands of dollars. Like I can't quantify enough for you how much money and time she has invested into this, and now is creating into a document that will save you all countless hours and money. So kudos to that. And I highly recommend, just as your career counselor, when you do connect with Courtney on LinkedIn, send a note and express how grateful you are for that advice and support. But on my end, I wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about the importance of, in terms of your application, your personal statement and your resume and those questions that you're going to be asked in your resume, in your essays. I think the biggest point I want to make is ask yourself the question now that if you were tasked in a Comms 101 class to provide me with a persuasive speech as to why you should be admitted into this MBA program, if you can't confidently answer that question and deliver that speech right now, then you're not ready to apply. Because if I am an admissions recruiter and I'm reading a basic MBA application, and in that application, I see a really strong resume and I see great experiences, but I don't see someone who's able to adequately to tell me why this program is going to propel them into a future, then why would I invest the time in educating you? So use this time to really be reaching out to mentors. I think the question that Carly asked about where do I put my money in now, I think the $3.50 you can spend on a cup of coffee to meet with someone is well within your budget. And that's a great way to start answering the question of like, what is my rationale? And finally, just know that if you're stuck on that, that's what my office and our services are there to provide, is to help coach students through the creation of their personal statements and of their essays. So those are some notes I wanted to pop in, but I want to say once again how like so appreciative I am, Courtney, for the support that you're providing for us in Orfalea and beyond at Cal Poly. So thank you so much.
Awesome advice, Travis. Really encourage you all to leverage the resources you guys have and continue to keep in touch with Travis and Mallory if you're graduating, and reach out to them. The Cal Poly family definitely continues. And just really excited to see so many people interested in MBA. I think, again, my biggest goal is like, I want to see all of you guys in top 10 MBA programs if that's your goal. And I'm really passionate about helping others achieve that, because I've gotten a lot of help to get to where I am, and I want to make sure that other people, you know, that we're making the path easier for each other and bringing people along. So turn around and help other people with the advice and experience that you have. I've seen some Cal Poly seniors offering their time and advice, and reach out to other people like me and other alum, because we all want to help you guys too. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and we really appreciated learning everything that you've learned through this process. Next steps, I did record this workshop, and I will be following up with all registered attendees to follow up with that resource sheet that we keep plugging. So like the anticipation is there to check that out. So I'll be following up with that in the recording tomorrow. And feel free to pass that and share that widely with others that weren't able to make it today. And then if you did pop in and you got the link without registering, just follow up with an email to me, Mallory Stoffel, and I can make sure that you get that information as well. All right, so with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Courtney. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, take care. Happy apartment hunting.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Courtney.
I'm just hanging out and letting people say their thank yous. All right, take care, y'all. Follow up with Travis or myself if you have any questions or you need any help.